Okay, why don't we call this meeting to order for the Subcommittee on General Government for the Finance Committee, January 26th. And Adam, we don't formally take a roll, but you want to just see who's here?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So let's see here. So Senator Peterson,
Here.
Senator Newman,
Here.
Senator Vogel,
Here.
Senator Locke,
Here.
Senator Eben. All right, Mr. Chairman, that completes the roll.
Louise Lucas is here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Lucas.
Hi, Louise. And
Sorry
Adam
about that.
Eben is just walking in.
Oh, okay. Fantastic.
All right, so why don't we begin? I believe our first presentation is from Patricia Bishop, Director of Virginia Retirement System. So, Patricia, if you're here, go ahead, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. As you noted, I'm Trish Bishop, Director of the Virginia Retirement System. I think Adam's going to graciously pull up the slide presentation and serve as our flipper today. So appreciate your help, Adam. Awesome. Just take a moment for it to load, I think.
What are you seeing? Are you seeing?
I'm just seeing your shared drive that has a listing of the presentation.
Okay, hold on just a sec here.
Sure.
Bear with me here. All right. Here we go. Are you seeing that now?
Yep, it's loading.
All right.
Yep, great, awesome.
Fantastic.
Thank you
Sorry
so
about
much.
that. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Adam. We'll just skip to the next slide, Adam, please. So as we begin, we'll take a moment to look at system administration and sort of what drives us at VRS. As an organization, our commitment is to serve those who serve others, and we're honored to serve our members who serve others across the Commonwealth each and every day. The next slide, please, Adam. So to provide some context regarding the size of VRS, with almost 743,000 active and retired members, VRS is now the 18th largest public or private pension system in the US and the 41st largest in the world. Next slide, Adam. So about 86% of our retirees remain in the Commonwealth. And why is this important? In fiscal year 2020, we paid out about $5.3 billion to retirees and beneficiaries. And with so many of our retirees remaining in the Commonwealth, the good news for all of us is that these dollars remain in the Commonwealth and are infused and circulated into state and local economy. Next slide, please, Adam. This is a snapshot of our total membership as of June 30th, 2020. Again, we have about 743,000 active members, retirees, and beneficiaries. Our largest group is our teacher group with 151,000 active members, followed by political subdivision employees and state employees. Plan 1 and Plan 2 are essentially now closed to new members, with the exception of those who are in hazardous duty positions. And our hybrid retirement plan is the plan for most of our new employees. As a reminder, the hybrid plan consists of two components. One, which is a sort of pension plan, which is based on a formula, the benefits based on a formula. And the other component is a defined contribution plan, which is similar to a 401k style plan. Next slide, please, Adam. The next slide sort of visually provides you with our plan membership related to the hybrid plan for the teachers. And as you can see, there are blue bars that are the Plan 1 folks. The green portion of the bar is Plan 2, and the yellow portion of these bars is are the hybrid plan members. The yellow portion of the bars is growing quickly. It now represents about 1/3 of the teacher population. And in the next 5 years, we expect it to be the majority of the teacher plan. And a similar pattern was shown for the state and political subdivision plans. Next slide, please, Adam. As we think about the hybrid retirement plan, it does combine both a defined benefit and a defined contribution components, and it employs a shared risk model between employer and employee. And this serves to reduce employer and investment longevity risk. It lowers the future costs of plan, but it also provides increased portability for our plan members. Next slide, Adam. I'll now give some background regarding VRS's legal framework. We are an independent agency and we administer a qualified plan under the Internal Revenue Code. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what it means to be a qualified plan under the IRS. So next slide, please, Adam. There are requirements a plan must meet to maintain its status as a qualified plan under the Internal Revenue Code. If a pension plan doesn't meet these requirements, it can lose that plan qualification and the related tax benefits. For example, with limited exceptions, the Internal Revenue Code precludes in-service pension payments from a qualified plan while a retiree is employed in a covered position. So in plain language, why is being a qualified plan important? Being a qualified plan provides federal tax advantages to participants as well as the fund. Tax benefits for qualified plan include pre-tax contributions for our members and participants, but perhaps more importantly, since about 2/3 of our benefits are funded by investment earnings, it provides for tax-exempt earnings for the fund's investments. Next slide, please. So we are also governed by what's known as the exclusive benefit rule in the Internal Revenue Code, which means that resources of the trust can only be used for the exclusive benefit of our members and beneficiaries. Next slide, please, Adam. In addition, the Virginia Constitution expressly states that VRS funds shall be separate and independent trusts, and it also echoes the Internal Revenue Code's exclusive benefit provision. Next slide, please, Adam. I'd like to change gears to touch upon the investment program. As I noted earlier, historically, nearly 2/3 of benefit payments are funded through investment earnings. That's why we focus intently on our investment program at VRS. Next slide, please, Adam. This slide provides a value of the trust over time. There are two dips that may be noticeable. The first is the tech bubble in the early 2000s, followed by in 08, 09, the Great Recession. But despite these dips over time, the fund has historically maintained steady growth. After the COVID-19 pandemic ensued, and after several months of market volatility at June 30, the fund balance stood at $82.1 billion. I should note that as of January 22nd, the unaudited value was $92.9 billion.
Okay, Trish, hold on one second.
Oh, sure.
All right, so let me ask, so we're at 92.9 billion right now as of January. What was that date you gave?
The 22nd, unaudited, but that's where it was. Yep.
Okay, and I'm going to wait on, I have a couple questions about that, but thanks, proceed.
Okay, sure. The next slide, please, Adam. So the trust fund deploys a fully diversified portfolio. We use stocks, bond, real estate, cash, and other investment strategies to diversify the portfolio. We mix different types of investments to limit exposure to a single asset class or strategy, thereby lowering the risk of the overall portfolio and the exposure to a single investment or strategy. Further, diversification serves to help moderate volatility or the highs and lows of the market. Next slide, please, Adam. As an investor in both public and private assets, we will experience the impacts of market conditions, but we've tried to position the fund to weather these these trends over the long term as soundly as possible. The light green line on this slide shows you what our assumed investment rate of return is over time, and it's currently 6.75%. In any given year, we know that performance will be above or below the green line, but from a long-term perspective, VRS continues to exceed the current 6.75 assumed actuarial rate of return. In fact, the 25-year period ending June 30th, the return was 7.8%. Next slide, please, Adam. To compare ourselves to our peers, we participate with Cost Effectiveness Management Benchmarking Service, which CEM assists more than 400 funds worldwide in providing benchmarking insights. Next slide. So how do we compare with other public pension plans in our investment program? This graph plots costs on the x-axis with net value added on the y-axis. And as shown here, VRS is the yellow triangle in the upper left quadrant, indicating that VRS provides net value added at a lower cost than our peers. More specifically, VRS's investment professionals have provided an average of $246 million net of all fees and incentive payments per year above the board policy benchmark. This results in about $2.5 billion in additional dollars to the fund over the past 10 years. Next slide, please, Adam.
Okay, hold on.
Yes.
I got to go back to that last slide.
Sure.
You have that axis, but the axis doesn't seem to be in the middle of the points.
Yeah. The X and Y axis is moved a little bit, and the way CEM does it is that it looks at the scale on the side starts with 120 to 130 basis points.
Okay, because from where our dot is located, we seem to be getting a lesser yield than most of the other peer trust funds.
For the 5-year, we do have what this plots is it looks at what your value add is over your policy benchmark. And so what the board has established is our mix of asset strategies, which we showed on the previous slide.
Okay.
And so our yield roughly over the past 5 years, and I can follow up with you, Senator Peterson.
Sure.
I do have a different set of data from Tux, which looks at where we fall in terms of our actual performance, not just net value add. And over the past 5 years, that puts us in a favorable quadrant as well. So I'll follow up with you on that.
And I appreciate that, but I just want to be clear that the way you have the axis set up, 80% of the dots are above the axis. So I understand that that's kind of what our goal is, but it by the same token, we seem to be somewhat behind our peer trust funds in terms of our performance, just whatever it's worth.
But I will say that some of those they may be getting additional net value add, but their cost is higher, and so you don't necessarily have as much bang for the buck. So if their dots are higher and to the right, their costs are much higher.
When you say cost, you mean cost in actually administering the fund?
Yeah, the cost in making those investments, yes.
All right, but wouldn't you have some type of net gain? I mean, typically for a multi-billion-dollar fund, I don't think the cost is, well, all right. Anyways,
okay.
Just proceed. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, I'll turn now to funded status and contribution rates. The funded status of a plan is the ratio of assets available to pay benefits compared to the plan's liabilities. It's a commonly used measure to gauge the health of a plan. This slide notes that the state's plans was, as of June 30th, was 72.9%. I'm sorry, Adam, we can move to the next slide. Was 72.9% on a market value of assets. And the green bars estimate the future funded status of the plan using June 30th data and returns that are assuming 6.75%. Next slide, please. This shows a similar picture for the teacher plan as of June 30th. The funded status of the teacher plan was 71.7% on a market value of assets. Next slide, please. For your reference, this slide provides the unfunded liabilities of the plans for the state employee, teacher, Valor, SPORS, and JRS plans. There's almost $21 billion in unfunded liability. For the political subdivisions, it's about $3.4 billion for a total of $24.3 billion. Next slide, please, Adam. This shows the contribution rates for the various statewide plan and also provides the total estimated amount of employer contributions from the general fund and non-general fund resources, about $2.25 billion. Next slide, please, Adam. Looking forward, this chart shows the estimated employer contribution rate for the state plan under several different modeled scenarios. So the baseline case, which is the orange line, shows future contribution rates if the 6.75 long-term assumed rate of return was achieved in the out years, and that would yield a 14.9% contribution rates. We also model it if returns are 1 and 2% above and below that base case, showing a range of 12.93% on the low end to 16.91% on the high end. So the takeaway here is that depending on what investment returns provide, there can be variety within the contribution rates. The next slide relates to, next slide please, Adam. The next slide relates to the teacher plan, again showing the same base case with the orange line at 6.75 being returned, and 1 and 2% above that base case. So the low would be 14.52 in the out years with a high of 18.42. But these scenarios don't include the $61.3 million in the governor's proposed budget. So I'll talk about that in the next few slides. Next slide, please, Adam. So the governor has proposed infusing $100 million into the fund and $61.3 million of that into the teacher plan. By way of reminder, in the 2010-2012 biennium, the Governor and General Assembly deferred contributions to the plan. Those contributions have been funded over a 10-year amortization schedule that began in 2013. The current funding schedule of that balance would have been paid off in fiscal year 2022. The governor's proposed budget infuses $61.3 million into the teacher plan. By doing so, it would pay off those balances 1 year earlier than expected. Paying the remaining balance should be viewed positively by the bond rating agencies since the debt has been in existence since the last recession. It'll also improve the funded status of the fund and moderate contribution rates going forward. The accelerated payment would improve funded status by about 10 basis points. Next slide, please, Adam. To illustrate the impact of the infusion of the funds into the plan, this chart shows the blue line represents the estimated employer contribution rates prior to the infusion of those dollars, and the green line is updated to reflect the infusion of those $61.3 million. The reduction in rates from, you'll see a big drop off in the rates, and that's due to paying off that 10-year deferred contributions. Also, I should note that they did not take a rate reduction as those dollars were infused. And so the accelerated payment allows us to recognize these gains over future years. And so we'd have a 5 basis point reduction in contribution rates over the next 20 years. So that's roughly $4.5 million in savings in each of the next 20 years. Next slide, please, Adam. This shows the funded status of the other post-employment benefit plans that we administer. You'll note that these are not as well funded as the pension plans. In general, this is because they have been on a pay-as-you-go basis for longer, and those benefits weren't pre-funded as early as the pension plans. I'll bring your attention to the state HIC plan, which is the health insurance credit, which is 12.24% funded, and that's where the governor's budget had infused additional dollars. The next slide, please, Adam, shows the other post-employment plans unfunded liabilities. And again, I'll bring your attention to the state health insurance credit plan, which has $894 million in unfunded liability. The next slide, please, Adam, shows contribution rates for the other post-employment benefit plans, and the state health insurance credit is 1.12%. Next slide, please, Adam. As the health insurance credits are some of the least well-funded plans, the governor's proposed budget includes an infusion of $38.7 million into the state HIC plan. The unfunded liability is $894 million, as I mentioned, and the infusion of the $38.7 million will have an immediate positive impact on the funded status of the plan. Similar to the teacher plan infusion into the state HIC will help moderate rates in the future. Based on our preliminary estimates, funded status would also be expected to improve by about 400 basis points, and there'd be about a 3 basis point drop in state health insurance credit rates over the next 20 years at about a $2.2 million savings per year. Next slide, please, Adam. So I want to just turn now to some of the impacts related to COVID-19. Next slide, please, Adam. In the face of unique challenges by the pandemic, some new solutions emerged, but we have continued to pay our $450 million payroll per month on time. Most of our staff are working from home to process new retirements, council members, and communicate news, and also process the contributions we receive from our 837 employers. But perhaps from a member perspective, our MyVRS Financial Wellness Program took on a new level of importance and proved to be nimble. We added a COVID-19 resource guide for our membership, which offers practical information for those who are experiencing financial insecurity during layoffs and illness. Next slide, please, Adam. I was also asked to talk about the impacts on retirements. So what we looked at were not all retirements, but a subset of those. We looked at those folks who were active employees and then who retired from active employment. We didn't look at our deferred members here. But at this point, it looks like fiscal year 2020 didn't provide any indication of increased retirements due to COVID-19. In fact, there was a slight reduction in the number of retirements from 3,757 compared to 4,100 in 2019. It's a little too early to draw conclusions, but we are seeing slightly higher retirements in fiscal year 2021 compared to 2020, but not historically higher than we've seen in past years. Next slide, please, Adam. Overall claims in our managed disabilities program were at or below normal activity, and our life insurance claim. However, our life insurance claims did see an uptick, but keep in mind our life insurance claims also include our retired population, and so we do expect our plan with our plan demographics to have increases year over year. But when we looked at life insurance claims from March through the end of 2020, we did see about 256 cases related to COVID-19, which represented about 4.1% of the claims that we received. Next slide, please. So as we also use CEM benchmarking for our administrative services, and so we try to measure and manage what gets measured. So our next slide, please. According to CEM's benchmarking service analysis, VRS pension administration cost falls $22 below the peer average of $103. But it's not only cost that's important. So on the next slide, Adam, when we compare our cost to other peers, our service delivery of 82 exceeds the peer median. So if you slip to the next slide, Adam. This graph shows both service and cost effectiveness as developed by CEM benchmarking, and the yellow arrow indicates that VRS can be found in the favorable quadrant where we provide a higher level of service at a lower cost compared to our US peers, and we've remained in that quadrant for over a decade. So that concludes my prepared remarks. Our list of VRS related bills is provided in the presentation for your reference, but I'd be happy to answer any additional questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, do we have any questions from the panel? Okay, I'm going to ask a couple questions. Yeah, Senator Evan.
Just to go over, you mentioned the hybrid plan in the beginning of your presentation. What is a new employee right now when they join VRS? What plan do they get into?
Most new employees will go into the hybrid retirement plan with the exception of those who have hazardous duty benefits, such as police officers, first responders, state police, correctional officers.
And Mr. Chairman, to follow up?
Yes, sir.
So most employees don't choose. That's what they're eligible for is the hybrid
Correct.
plan. Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Yes, sir.
Chairman.
Okay. I do have a question of my own, and I guess I've been around long enough to remember when we borrowed from VRS in order to balance our budget, and I believe that was 2010. Can you explain, first of all, do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, sir.
Can you explain to me how we did that legally?
Yes, so you can't, you're correct, you can't necessarily borrow from the funds, you deferred the contributions. So once the funds go into the trust, they cannot be taken out. The funds didn't go into the trust. And so those were the 10 for the, there were different amortization schedules. The state employee plan was already paid back. And so when I talked about the infusion of the $61 million in the governor's proposed budget, that relates to the remaining balance from that, from those deferred contributions that were being paid off on an amortization schedule of 10 years. So $61 million pays off that balance.
And we did pay that off, as I recall. In other words, we made back up those payments.
For everything except the teacher plan. And so that's the remaining balance of about $61 million that that the governor's proposed budget is trying to pay off earlier than the schedule.
61 million.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? And I have one comment at the end. Any other questions from the panel? Okay, first of all, I want to thank you. That's a terrific presentation and very professional. And I do think the level of services VRS is very good. Having said that, I do think the financial performance is mediocre. And I'd be interested to know kind of how we compare with peer groups. I'm not impressed by, I think we could have done better particularly in the last 5 years when the market has basically almost doubled. So, would like to get a little bit more information on how we compare with other state funds, maybe CalPERS or people like that. But again, I think your presentation is terrific, and I very much appreciate it.
Happy to follow up, Senator Peterson, and my pleasure to be here and always happy to help. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Okay, next up we have from Chris Piper from Department of Elections. Chris, are you out there?
I'm here, Mr. Chairman. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Why don't you proceed?
Thank you. I appreciate the committee inviting me here today to talk about the proposal for the replacement of the Virginia Elections and Registration Information System, more commonly referred to as VERIS. Next slide. What I'm going to do today is go over the history of how we got here and to the proposal before the committee today. So in 2002, the Help America Vote Act provided grants to the states in the wake of the 2000 presidential election. Virginia set aside some of those funds to purchase new voting equipment at the local level. but also to replace the legacy Virginia voter registration system with what we call Veris. That went live in 2007. Fast forward to 2018, and Adam, next slide, please. JLARC commissioned a study on the Department of Elections, and one of their findings was on Veris. One of their requests was to look into Veris, and their findings were, as you can see, not sufficiently reliable or functional, and has ongoing reliability problems. Just prior to the JLARC report, the General Assembly had requested from the department an assessment as to the initial cost estimate for replacing Veris or for upgrading Veris. The initial cost estimate was $31 million, and then the other option that the General Assembly chose was to provide $1 million over each year for 5 years to continue to make improvements to Veris. However, after the JLARC report, the recommendation from JLARC was to include language directing the department to study whether to rebuild or replace Veris. So we did utilize funding that $1 million a year for a couple of years to make continued improvements to Veris, but that was put on hold after the JLARC report. Next slide, please. So in 2019, the General Assembly, you all asked us to submit a report with an assessment regarding options of replacing or rebuilding Veris per the JLARC recommendation. So the Department of Elections contracted with experts in the field, and we worked with VITA. We polled general registrars and their staff, as well as elect staff, and then we reviewed the technical details of Veris. Next slide. And our findings showed that Veris is a legacy system now with operating on very old technology. As we know, technology moves very quickly. And so when it was built, the systems in place now are utilizing much more advanced technology. Further, we determined that third-party voter registration systems have matured immensely over the years as they've contracted and been built in other states. And so the final recommendation to the General Assembly was to utilize a third-party vendor to customize an existing statewide voter registration system for Virginia. Next slide, please. So last year, you all asked us to release an RFI to estimate costs for replacement of Veris. And once again, we contracted with RFP experts, technology experts, as well as statewide voter registration system experts. We worked with our staff along with general registrars and their staff to review presentations from various third-party vendors. During that period as well, the 2020 Help America Vote Act security grants were passed by Congress, and this provided an additional $10.2 million to the Commonwealth, of which the state is required to match 20% of those funds. Next slide, please. Our RFI received information from 6 vendors. Of those, 2 vendors were determined not to be sufficient for our findings. So from the 4 that were left, we got a bevy of information. That report is available on the Legislative Information System website. We also reviewed other states which have recently replaced and or built a new statewide voter registration systems. And comparing all of that information, determined that the cost of replacing Veris would be estimated at $29 million. And therefore, the governor has proposed utilizing the existing HAVA grant information and matching funds, which equal 12.3 million, as well as requesting an additional 16.7 million in general funds. Next slide, please. So realizing that, we have begun already to prepare an RFP, request for proposal, and then based on the information provided in the appropriation language from last year. The intention is to release the RFP and, assuming that the funds are granted, be prepared to go live with the new voter registration system as of July 1st, 2022. And that is essentially how we got to where we are today, and I'm happy to answer any questions for the committee.
Okay, any questions out there? Senator Eben.
Mr. Chairman, yes, for Mr. Piper. I'm curious, will the new Veris have capability for things like instant runoff voting that we passed a few years ago as a local option? Will that be built into the system?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Several pieces of legislation have come in, and all of those pieces of legislation, same-day voter registration, as well as the instant runoff, as you were speaking of, are built into the requirements that we're preparing as we speak.
And as a follow-up, sir, does Veris have anything to do with the election night reporting? Will that be at all impacted by new system?
Yeah, that'll be something that we would be reviewing with the new system. One of the limitations of Veris, just to expound on your question here, is that any of these changes that we talk about, legislative changes that come in, it is very costly to make those upgrades in Veris utilizing this old technology. The idea here would be to build a system that is much more flexible and easier to make legislative changes like what you're talking about. So when it comes to election night reporting, yes, that functionality will be built in to utilize a more robust election night reporting system.
And a final question,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Go ahead.
Mr. Piper, when we make changes during the legislative session in the 2022 session, and you've got the system coming online, and I think it's at 2022, is there any reason to delay enactment dates next year, or will you be able to keep up with whatever changes we anticipate legislatively?
So I would anticipate that the new system, again, will be more flexible and allow for easier implementation of changes regarding legislation. Of course, I'd have to see specific and particular legislation. That said, the goal would be to have a system that would be easily upgraded or more easily upgraded than the system we currently have.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for the presentation.
Okay, anybody else on the panel have questions for Chris? Chris, I guess I have sort of the same question that Adam had, but I'm going to pose it slightly differently. It does seem over the last few years our election night reporting seems to be significantly slower than it used to be back in the 90s when Adam and I got started in politics. Is there any reason for that? Is it more safety checks in the system now? I mean, why is it that the system seems to get slower as technology gets faster?
It's a good question. I think this year, particularly with the changes in the way Virginians voted, I think is the biggest thing for this past year. As far as the rest, I think it's or previous years. I think that again, it's just more checks in the system to ensure that the information that's being placed online, that's unofficial results, obviously, but ensuring that it's as close to correct as possible and putting more checks on the system. That said, we are continually looking and reviewing to improve that process. I think with a new system, simplifying the process for the registrars as they're entering in that information would certainly lead to a quicker display of results.
All right, thank you very much. All right, any other questions for Chris? Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, that is the last of the staff presentations. Adam, is that correct?
Yes, sir. I was going to attempt to go through the requested member budget amendments if you'd like, but there are several of them and we don't have, excuse me, a lot of time, but we can I was going to bring up kind of just a chart or a table of all of those and speak to those briefly. And if anyone has any questions, we can do that. And I'll also send you the detailed sheets at the conclusion of the meeting.
And let me just preface by saying everybody should have a list of the member budget amendments. And I think it's fair to say there's a distinction between those that cost money and those that don't cost money. So I guess I'll put off any sort of substantive discussion on them until we have a meeting next week, I assume, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that's when we will actually select which budget amendments we're going to push forward, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So having said that, Adam, why don't you go ahead with your presentation and then see where we are.
All right. Can you all see that? Okay. So going through these really pretty quickly, and please just stop me if anyone has any questions about any of these, but just starting with 1.1S, this was a language amendment that would direct the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee to convene a work group to review the process by which non-elected judges, including retired judges, are utilized by the circuit courts to make legally binding decisions and how frequently they're used, and then would report to the Judiciary Committee during the 2022 session. Line 2, number 2S, this provides $1.3 million the second year, and this would provide full health insurance benefit to Senate members' second legislative assistants who work full-time. Third line, language that creates a special joint subcommittee on aging services and would consider best practices in the administration of a state office of aging and make recommendations on these issues. Line 4, this is a comprehensive recruitment and retention salary incentive package for Capitol Police. So what this will, it would increase the starting salaries of officers from its current $42,750 to $49,000 following graduation. And then from a compression standpoint, would provide $6,250 to all officers to manage, again, compression, and then increase the starting salary of communications officers up to $37,000, and then would also adjust the wage employee salaries. Let's see here. Line 5, this is a language amendment, or rather provides $50,000 for the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Commission, and it would begin the process of creating a memorial in tribute to the late Senator Yvonne Miller. Line 6, this is a language amendment, and it specifies that during a study of the health insurance affordability in the individual market, that the Joint Commission on Healthcare include an analysis of the feasibility of providing a basic health program at little to no cost for individuals below 200% of the federal poverty level. Line 7, this is an amendment would provide $348,000, and it's related to Senate Bill 1273. And right now, the FIS indicates that there's member compensation and travel expenses totaling about $30,000, as well as an indeterminate cost for commission staff that it would create for the Behavioral Health Commission. Line 8, there's $100,000 in the second year, and this is related to SB 1105. There's not a FIS yet, and it has a delayed effective date of July 1 of 2022. So we'll wait to see what happens with that. Line 9, $250,000 each year. This is related to SB 1315, and a preliminary FIS indicates an indeterminate cost to the criminal fund, which is the courts, what they pay the court appointed counsel out of. And that is reflecting the cost for expanded submission of expert testimony. Line 10, this would just require the Supreme Court of Virginia to distribute evaluation forms in all circuit court cases that are overseen by a retired judge, collect the results of the evaluation, and publish the findings to the House Courts of Justice Committee and Senate Committee on the Judiciary. And then they would just report back on the number and types of cases referred to retired judges. Line 11 provides $3.2 million a second year for 2 additional judgeships. So this is the Court of Appeals legislation, SB 1261. I will say that the governor's budget put in about $5.1 million related to this over the biennium. And so this reflects the additional cost in the second year based on how the bill actually came out relative to the SJ 47 judicial council report indicating the number of judgeships recommended and support staff. So the SB 1261 includes 6 judges and kind of trues up the support staff and different direct and indirect costs that would be incurred as a result of the legislation, hence the additional $3.2 million in the second year. All right, going on to 12. There is $6.7 million, and this is related to the SB 1443, the mandatory minimums. And the FIS came out for this, and they could actually spread that cost over 3 years, given that it would have a full July 1, 2024 implementation date. So that would actually come down to about $3.9 million from the 6.6 after it's spread over 3 years.
Adam,
Yes, sir.
why is it costing us $6.65 million to reduce mandatory minimums? I mean, there's less incarceration costs. What's the cost to the judicial system?
I think that is literally going to court-appointed attorney costs for indigent clients, because I believe that anyone who's incarcerated under a mandatory minimum would then be permitted to petition.
Hold on, we're not making that bill retroactive, at least the way it came out of court. So I put an asterisk by that, because I don't think that cost is what you all think it is.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and if the bills change relative to what's been provided, of course, we follow that as we go along. You know, bills come and go, and they're amended, then that obviously would impact the funding level.
So my point is, if that bill is prospective, so it's from July 1
Right.
going forward, then there's no people get to go back into court and get their sentences reduced because the mandatory minimum has been repealed. It's only prospective.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so just looking at line 13 here, this is $200,000 the second year, and this would go to the Rappahannock Circuit Court to expand the number of participants in its Veterans Docket program. Line 14, and so if you see lines 14, 16, and 18, those are related to the creation of a public defender office in Chesterfield County, and that's reflecting the estimated savings in the criminal fund from court-appointed attorneys' cost as a result of creating the office in Chesterfield County. So that would net out against the cost of the increase on line 20, which is we estimated initially at $2 million. The FIS has since come out and says it's about $3 million, a little over $3 million in 33 positions. So that would have to be trued up if that bill were to advance, and then it would be netted out against those negatives you see there. On those lines. Jumping back up to 15, line 15, there's a proposal that would increase the salaries of district court clerks by 10% each year. So the first year amount is prorated, and that is the cost associated with that. Jumping down to 17, there's $50,000 and adds language establishing a pilot program to administer an adverse childhood experience assessment on any child that comes into the court. To inform court services and training in trauma-informed care. Line 19 is related to SB 1165 that would repeal the death penalty. And what this does is essentially, you don't see anything there, but it's redirecting $3.9 million in existing funding for the Capital Indigent Defense Services, which is 4 regional offices. That wouldn't presumably be needed if we were to abolish the death penalty, and it's just being redirected then within the Indigent Defense Services. And if that were the case, then some of that funding presumably could be either swept and or redirected for the PD office in Chesterfield and things related to SB 1261, for example, and that sort of thing. Line 21. $333,000. This is related to SB 1391, and there is no FIS on that yet. Line 22, $500,000. This is related to collection of pre-trial data by the Virginia Criminal Sentencing Commission. Line 23, $150,000 would establish a children's cabinet advisor in the office of the governor. I'm sorry, I need to advance the slide here. There we go. Line 24, that is also related to SB 1261. So the governor's budget put in that's Court of Appeals legislation. The governor's budget put in funding for 6 positions in OAG. And I think the OAG had indicated that they would need in excess of 50 positions to accommodate that for criminal appeals at their outset versus the Commonwealth Attorney's offices. And that's what that reflects. Line 25, there is $50,000 each year, and this is related to SB 1410. Line 26, $160,000 each year. This is SB 1395. It has a delayed effective date of September 1, 2021. The FIS actually indicated no cost for the Office of the Attorney General, which is what that funding was put in for, but it did result in a woodroom. So presumably that some of that funding could be swept if that bill were to advance. The first and second year amounts less the $50,000 for the woodroom. Line 27, this is a language amendment, directs the Data Analytics Commission to evaluate and align educational data to essentially align that with education and workforce opportunities. Line 28, that is funding that would reflect a 5% in each year's salary increase for all deputy sheriffs, and you can see the prorated amount in the first year. That's what that reflects. Line 29, this is $600,000. This is for the SAVIN system, and it would, for the compensation board to contract for services with BCPI to provide automated protective order notification services. And this is an enhancement to SAVIN that they needed to perform. Line 30 here, this is overtime funding for Sheriff's Office of $3.1 million the first year and $773,000 the second year, and has to do with time spent servicing TDOs and other services that they're providing. This is generating overtime for sheriff's offices locally. Line 31, this is $90.9 million that would fund a career progression plan for deputy sheriffs. Line 32, this is funding $1.5 million for the Piedmont Regional Jail. And this has to do with their federal cost recovery, and they're seeking additional funding related to positions they're housing that the compensation board would normally take for federal inmate bed space. Line 33, there's a language amendment. Okay, that has to do with the inmates. So that's actually. Okay, this is a cost recovery. This retains an existing exemption for the federal inmates. That's a cost recovery for the WTRJ. And then there's the Piedmont Regional Jail cost recovery on line 34. All right, trying to go through these quickly, given that there's 70 and acknowledging the time here. So there is a language amendment on line 35 that would direct funding for the compensation board, and this is just a language amendment related to SB 1226 that would direct the compensation board to come up with a new formula for staffing for Commonwealth attorneys' offices, and says that the offices whose staffing levels and funding would be changed would be essentially held harmless as a result of that reformula. The FIS came out and said it needs $300,000 to contract with the NCSC for a weighted caseload study. So that isn't reflected actually in the member amendment. Line 36, there is funding each year for a 10% increase for the circuit court clerk salaries in each year. Okay, lines 37, 38, and 39. This is increasing circuit court clerks' fees and directing the additional revenues generated by that back into the circuit court clerk system to increase salaries for circuit court clerks used exclusively for that. Line 41, there is language, again, separate language directing the compensation board to convene a work group to develop new metrics for Commonwealth's Attorney's Office staffing standards. Line 42, this is language directing the comp board to review the plan to be developed by DCGS outlining agencies' roles and engagement with the Marcus Alert System related to HB 5043 and 5038. And they would provide a report to the chairs of the money committees by November 1 of 2021. Line 43, again, that has to do with positions for the Piedmont Regional Jail, and that just reflects the position count table numbers. Line 44, there is an amendment that delays the enactment of project labor agreements to November 1 of 2021, and then has a dollar threshold that no project labor agreement should be used on a construction project, I think below $80 million.
Adam, I think I'm gonna have to cut you off here because we're coming up against 8:30, and I know we've all got committees we need to go to. Let me ask you this, and obviously we're going to have to go through these on our own over the weekend and decide what we want to put in and what we don't. How do you want to go about this when we meet at our next meeting in terms of sort of deciding what we want to put in our own recommendation to the full committee?
Yes, sir. I think what I can do is you all have this. It was sent out, and I can resend it if you'd like. It's with the materials, that subsequent email that I sent.
Right.
Yes. I can send the detailed half sheets that would correspond to each one of these. And then you can look. I think the members can take time in identifying things they have questions about or have a particular interest in. And then when we have an opportunity to meet, I think we'll have to probably just take a good deal of time and go through and identify those things and prioritize those accordingly based on member interest and pursuant to your direction, Mr. Chairman.
And this would be at our meeting next Tuesday morning.
Yes, sir, I believe so. So I think our meetings that would have people come and speak are probably done. I think we're probably going to get now into the deeper conversations about budget development in the subsequent meeting, and we start to kind of develop the subcommittee report and reflect.
So why don't I'm going to sort of have two charges to the committee subject of, and this is open for member comment, but one, that at our next meeting we be prepared to have a list of items that we want to see added to or recommend that we add to the budget. So be prepared to defend your own recommendations. And obviously if we have items that have no defenders, they're not going to get added. I think that's easy to say. So that's number one. Number two, and a follow-on to our conversation last week, you know, there's no budget amendment in here about actually returning any sort of plan for return to work. And that's one of the concerns I have. We've got so many employees working remotely, and we don't have any, right now there's no direction from the state assembly, who represents the state taxpayer, about returning to work, and if we're not going to return to work, certain agencies, what we do with those properties, or how we address that. And I'm not saying we're going to make any hard and fast decisions in this budget, but at a minimum I think it's something maybe we need to talk about, having some type of guidance. So I guess
I didn't know if that was directed at everyone or directed at me.
I may simply be talking to myself, and I may be the only one that is concerned about this. But I will say that one thing I've learned from this pandemic is if we don't start planning ahead, we've already seen where that can have a negative impact. So I just think it behooves us to plan ahead, perhaps, and at least talk about return to work, and if we have agencies that are not going to return to work, what we do with buildings that they lease or buildings that they own. So just a marker. Any other questions for Adam, or any sort of general comments? I don't want to talk about the merits of specific items right now, but any sort of general comments, other things we may need to take up next week from the panel? Okay, so we have 8:30, so we're going to adjourn, and Adam, you will send out the half sheets which give the summary, and I'd simply ask the members, be prepared. Hello, Louise. How are you in two places at once?
I wondered the same thing. She's in two places at the same time.
That is absolutely brilliant. I was wondering where that bookshelf came from. Okay. So I would ask the members, please do your homework over the weekend and be prepared to make recommendations for our general recommendations to the budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye.